Now, the appetite for debt has grown in the past 5 years. A survey by Momentum indicates many South Africans have not taken advantage of low interest rates to reduce their exposure to debt. Now, some consumers use about 76% of their income to repay debt. Very little is put aside as savings. The biggest demand for debt has come from people who earn more than 15,000 Rand per month. Paul Slot, who is the president of Octogen Debt Counsellors, is in studio with me and will discuss this more with me. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. Now, why are we so much in debt as a country?
I think the consumers over many years have started to increase the exposure to debt. And let me explain simply how it happens. Debt for housing and cars is normally not a problem. I take some debt, and debt is normally used to actually fund your living experiences. And when that debt is finished and you have to repay that debt, you either have to fund it from income or what many consumers do, they take another loan. And then they get into a debt spiral where the number of debt agreements that they have has increased so much that the amount needed to repay the debt exceeds the amount available to repay debt.
How bad is the situation really?
9 million people at the moment have an impaired record out of the about 20 million consumers that make use of debt. So the position is bad. No, it's actually very bad. Consumers are struggling. Consumers find it very difficult to spend money on household effects, and some consumers find it very difficult to actually keep up with the debt. They actually continue that position until the last bank has said no more debt, and then they're trying to rectify the position.
Is it a situation that people are borrowing for basics, or are they borrowing for, lavish lifestyles?
The majority of people in trouble are borrowing money to live, to actually to spend on their lifestyle. It's I go shopping, I have a credit card, I don't do a budget. End of the month I say, okay, I have to pay all these credit cards that I have, where do I find the money? So it's funding the lifestyle. The lifestyle is simply higher than what the income of what is generated. Problem is that food prices have increased so much, electricity has increased, we have to pay toll roads, so all those increases have to come from somewhere. We did a calculation is that all these increases over the last year requires you to actually have an additional 6 to 9% of income spent only on increases. Where does it come from? Either you have to cut your lifestyle or you have to borrow.
And I guess that leads to my next question. How do you know that I'm in way over my head and you are in debt? What do you look out for?
The consumer is normally the first to know that they're in trouble, but probably the last to react. And they're in trouble when they actually have month incomes and they say, I have to pay the bills. I don't have enough money. What do I do? Many consumers actually at that point in time actually say, oh, the only solution is for me to take another loan. That's probably the wrong attitude to take. That point, if you actually solve the issue at that point, 90% of consumers can solve it. What they don't do is they get all these lovely ads and they actually borrow more money, then they end up in trouble. The average person in South Africa has about 3 to 4 debt agreements, and that's fine, and they spend on average less than 35% of the after-tax income on debt repayments. When a person applies for debt counselling, debt review, on average they have 11 to 15 credit agreements, and they spend between 50 and 60% of the income on debt repayments.
And when we talk about debt counselling and debt review, what exactly are we talking about?
Debt counselling is a wonderful tool that can be used by consumers to get out of trouble. It's a road to financial freedom. What happens is that you apply for debt review, the budget is done for the consumer, and amount is set aside to repay the debt. Credit providers have come to the table. They will reduce interest rate, they will reduce fees to make it easier for the consumer to repay debt. During that period, you actually have to repay debt. You can't take more debt. And after 4 or 5 years, you are debt-free in terms of your short-term debt, and a clearance certificate can be issued for the long-term debt like your home loan.
Now, when you mention the credit bureau, people break out into a cold sweat, especially those people with debt. Is there help?
What we've seen is that on the 1st of April, the Credit Information Amnesty regulation came out, and it was wonderful news for the consumers, because what has meant is that the bad information has been removed from a credit bureau. And if a debt has been repaid, that information has also been removed. So credit reports have been cleaned. It does not mean that the debt not been written off. The debt still needs to be repaid, but at least the bad information has removed. That's the one part of good news that will probably benefit a lot of consumers, and they can apply for more debt, or their record is cleaner. The other good news is that the National Credit Act is in the process of being amended. The process has been completed. We're waiting for the President to sign the bill, and then it will become effective. And that in itself will help consumers to make use of debt counselling and to have the protection of the National Credit Act to go through the process.
And that's where we leave it. Paul, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That was Paul Slot, the President of Octogen Debt Counsellors.
Know more about your world. ENCA.com